Welcome back to another episode of Upon Request. I'm here with Carolina Santamaria, Eric Johnson, and our guest co-host, Marvin Hippolyte. My name is Mikkel, and we're here to talk about the politics of precarity. So for years, we've watched cruel corporate-backed decisions that further sow power for corporations while isolating people from different walks of life, from protections, thinking about Hobby Lobby, threats against undocumented migrants, or even the increasingly unstable economic outlook for workers. These are all examples of the divide and conquer strategy of the elite against people, but why? So today we're just going to talk more about divide and conquer, the ways that our communities have been under attack, and kind of get into this idea of what does precarity do for the elite? And maybe I'll just kick it over to Marvin to start us off. What are you thinking today?
Man, don't get me started. I could go down a deep conspiracy hole, but I won't do that to you today. I look at it like football, they're just the ops, and they got to do everything to disrupt us. But what is their goal?
Have you like seen that in your organizing, like the ways that this is like, the targeting of communities, the ways that like you get temporary relief, like things like TPS, temporary. I mean, you should talk more about what TPS is for Haitian migrants, but how's that been showing up in the community?
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, we saw during the election, of course, we talked about that last time, kind of otherizing people. That's like the first step. Make it okay to sort of put others down and then attack the leg that they're standing on. It's just so hypocritical because, again, the United States is behind the destabilization of a lot of these countries. They come here, they come here to work really low wage jobs, right? And then they kind of keep them captive. We've seen this dance before, but yeah, we see it all the time, right? They otherize them, make people hate them, don't give the full context of why they're here, and make them dependent on you.
Yeah. I think that dependency thing is like really important, right? And we can kind of get into it a little bit more, but it's really hard to get people to galvanize around like what we're up against when they have to focus on paying rent at the end of the month. And it's really hard to pay rent when you're making like $3 an hour, you're working like 60, 70 hours a week, maybe more, multiple jobs. So yeah, I think that's super important. Kato, how for you, like especially being from the other side of the like immigration debate in the communities that, are many times thought of when we think about like immigration politics, like how does this like land for you as like as an
Yeah, no, I think this is such an interesting topic to be talking about right now, given the fact that this is a strategy that is being employed on us right now. So, I mean, a lot of the things that I'm reminded of or how much they don't, how much the particularly elitist powers that have a lot to gain from this moment don't want us to remember that actually when you go to your neighbor's house and you chat with them and you like sit at their table, you have a lot more in common than you realize because you're making assumptions that you have nothing in common with your neighbor who like you've never even had a conversation with. And I think there's something, I'm sure a lot of folks that are from global South immigrant communities feel really similarly in that there is like a really when you move to the US and you move into these neighborhoods and there's this like cultural separateness and isolation that is very part of US culture that I think continues to be exacerbated and pushed. So I'm really interested to have this conversation today and particularly thinking about things like, for example, recently it came out that Jeff Bezos was pushing personal liberties as something that the Washington Post should focus on, which are tactics that actually were used back in slavery in the US. Focus on personal liberties so then you can like take away the idea that people have collective power and that you should just be worrying about yourself and that only worrying about yourself is how you're going to survive, which is actually quite the opposite. If you only focus on yourself and you forget that we are actually all so interconnected, we like truly learned that during the pandemic. I think that is being attacked right now, this idea that we actually do have collective power, and which is why I feel like this is such a conversation and so important to think about, the ways these tactics are being employed. And I think right now, one of the stages that we're seeing it very, very viscerally is immigration, obviously. But I really think I sit and think about, yeah, just all of the other communities that have been actually experiencing this for a long time. Like immigrants, undocumented people have been experiencing this for a long time. But I also think about trans people and how trans people are being used as pawns legislatively and have always been used to divide people in their own families, So I think that this is an important conversation, and I'm very excited to hear sort of all of the angles that folks are bringing, because we are all, we all have a lot in common, especially like this group. We all have a lot in common, but we also come from very different backgrounds and very different life experiences. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see where points really converge in all of our personal stories. So yeah, I think those are the thoughts that I'm feeling right now at the beginning, and very excited to kind of dive into the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I hadn't heard the thing about Bezos. I mean, I'm not surprised nor shocked, but I think it's a really important point to bring into this, because I do think there's many layers to this, like the who is doing it, why they're doing it, what are their reasonings that they either tout publicly, or what are the backings for the reasoning behind the scenes. And like one of these things is like the US has never gotten over the fact that like economically it takes people being at the lowest they can be paid wage-wise to keep this country running. And like we were at our best during slavery economically, right? And white folks would have you believe that like we need to go back to that, right? And then on the other side, you've got like, that's why they fight against raising the federal minimum wage. That's why they make sure that the costs of everything goes way, way, way up, because they know that they can just bleed us dry with every aspect of this economy. And so I think that that's piece of it. I also do get really caught up in this, like the religious zealots in this political game, because, for instance, I mentioned earlier, like Hobby Lobby, right? Like that was a decision, like we don't want to do anything to protect people that are gay or trans, and like we're an employer, and so we have no responsibility to those people, and we can get away with, keeping them out of the conversation. And I can accept and agree that there's just like some folks that are uber religious and kind of crazy, and like they will do things based off of that. But I also have never been satisfied with that argument. Like I've never been like, they would spend millions of dollars to go through a Supreme Court case to stop this thing purely because they believe in Jesus and like the second coming of Christ, right? Like that for me isn't enough. And I don't think it's enough to validate like the way that they move in this political arena. And obviously we're being like really US centric, but when you put that up against like, movements more globally, the only people making those claims are usually like right-wing political movements, right? Like, yes, there's religion incorporated in some of them, but by and large, the like through line is that they're right-wing politics. So yeah, I don't know, like that has been always a struggle for me. And I think that immigration has been like one of those hot button issues where it's like, that actually does not make sense even from a religious perspective. It's purely right-wing. And so the commonality for me is definitely like corporations and people with money trying to like hoard their money and then make it everyone else's problem, that this issue that people are feeling because of that is like that it's like their personal responsibility. So yeah, I don't know how that's like landing for y'all, or what that's bringing up to.
How deep can I go? No, I'm joking. Look, I've really been thinking about this for a while now. Well, recently, I keep asking myself, right? Like, if this is a football game of life and death, what do we know about our opposition? Are we doing any opposition research? Who are the ops? I mean, I think us as leftist or left-leaning people, I think the ops for us are clear. It's the 1%, it's just oligarchs. But for the vast majority of America, maybe up until recently, that wasn't the case. I think that people are more aware now. But the reality is we're dealing with indoctrination. We got to go back into history and look at the education system, the genesis of that, the healthcare system, the genesis of that. When you look at the fact that a lot of these families, a lot of these billionaires that are operating now, they've been rich for generations, connected to some of the biggest families in the world. what do they believe? When they meet in secret, what do they think about? I see Bill Gates now doing healthcare policy. Is he a racist? When you look at his family, what does he think about Black people? How does that show up in his work? I think we got to spend some time really thinking about what it is that these elites want. Because for me, it's not simply the money. It can't just be simply the money. Maybe money's addictive. Maybe power's addictive. Maybe. But it's not simply the money. There's something else at play, because they're spending a great deal of energy and money to try to convince people that, as Kyle was saying earlier, that they're disempowered. I don't vote. Doesn't matter. I don't go to college. Doesn't matter. It's futile. You can't say anything because you're under surveillance. Now we're policing ourselves. Maybe they don't even really have that much power. Maybe they don't really have the manpower to actually do it. But we're so scared enough, right? That we're like, damn, maybe we won't try this. I don't know.
I feel like when you said I don't want to go down the conspiracy road, I did want to say, like, yes, please, let's do it. I'm here for it. But I think, speaking of like the history part of it, the combination of fiscal conservatism with social conservatism hasn't always been a thing. Like, that became what we now call the right wing. But like, for example, being very religious didn't necessarily mean only looking out for yourself. So when you're talking about like the indoctrination part of it, it's not that much of a conspiracy. It's just in regards of who is the opposition. It's I think very clearly a set of people who see themselves as modern royalty. Like, in terms of like, what do we want? What do those people want? It's not just money. It's like, in an age where kings and queens and monarchs aren't really a dominant power, we have your Elon Musks and your other billionaire class that will switch parties or political ideologies as it fits their economic and personal power and like gratification and ego, essentially. And so I think that's also helpful and important for us to think about when we talk about like left, right, or Democrat, Republican. It's like, our opposition will flip what sides at any point. And so it's not necessarily like the individuals who vote for somebody like Trump. It's like, what creates the system for someone to think that voting for a fascist is in my personal interest, is what I think we need to not forget. Or in terms of opposition research in particular, it's like, how do we get people to think about their self-interest is also tied to our collective interest?
Yeah, I'm really resonating with that, Eric. But I want to make sure that you finish your thought. I just wanted to say I'm really resonating.
Thought finished. I'm just like, let's go deep. The conspiracy is there.
Yeah.
Like, all of this is intentional. It's not an accident. Or if it is an accident,
For real.
it's like a happy accident, and they're like, let's keep this going. This worked out really well. Through trial and error, how could we be divided?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that really brings up like that question of, because let's be real, does a Jeff Bezos want the same thing that you want? Like, when you think about the man that has amassed one of the largest like portfolios of wealth, you think he wants the same thing as you? Like, I feel like we can't even know what he wants at this point, because like rich people have access to things that we don't even know that they have access to. Like, it's a different world. And I think that is something that we need to be reminded of, is that these people that are purporting that they are representing your interests actually live in a different reality. So how could they know what you want and you need to survive in this life? And I think, like, speaking of conspiracy theories, I think something I ask myself all the time is when like the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezos of the world are investing so much money in a particular thing, like, for example, space exploration. It doesn't feel like a conspiracy to say, but maybe it is a conspiracy to say they know that the plan of the global elites and capitalists is not to stop extracting natural resources. They're going to drive this planet to the ground until they can go start another new society once they figure out where they can start that new society. So that's like, I mean, it gets real sci-fi, but honestly, that is why I think Afrofuturism is one of the most important types of literature to be reading right now, because it is like, we need to understand and be more expansive in our imagination about what actually is happening and like the realities that that can reach. So I feel like, yeah, this is such a, I'm very interested, especially to hear like particularly what our listeners think, because it is one of the bigger issues that we're facing. And I think for leftists in particular, we have a really bad reputation in having conversations with people that are very, very at oppositions with us. We lack a lot of empathy. And I say that as someone who has really tried to work through a lot of that. It's hard to say, but it is so true that I am fighting for the rights of the people that voted for the people that are taking away my family's rights. Like, it is true that I want rights for those people too, because I know that they're being fooled. And that's like what we're talking about today, right? We can't let people go off the deep end, because if we let them go off the deep end, then we're all going to go off the deep end, right? So it's like, what is the core of this divide and conquer? And like, where do we, in our individual positionalities, like, and especially as leftists, especially as organizers, how are we, and in places where we have the emotional capacity, because, you know, I'm not going to go out and speak to some racist person that like is happy that immigrants are being deported. Like, for my own mental peace, there's someone better positioned to have some of those conversations. But I actually do take it upon myself, especially when someone is like close in my life. They don't really know or understand or have ever heard a personal story of someone. You know, I was in a mixed status family until my parents moved out of the US. Like, hearing my story, knowing someone that you've known personally for a long time tell you, bro, you've been living the wrong, like, that's actually not how it worked for my family. So let me shatter that for you right now, that actually there's some people that there's a lot of people that it doesn't apply to. Like, I'm like being very cautious, because we're in a place right now of like, my parents are not in the US anymore. And like I had a parent that was undocumented. So like, it feels a little weird to be like very open about that right now. But I really do think about, you know, my dad paid taxes. Like, he paid taxes. That's like one of the biggest lies we're told about immigrants. Immigrants actually are subsidizing our lives. And if you deport the 2 million plus people, your economy is going to crash. It is a fact. So it is just like, how do we like bring this to people and bring it in a way that they're going to be open to it? Because I think, again, they want us to be fighting with each other. That's like what we're talking about, right? They want us to be at each other's throats. So yeah, I think that it's a really good point to think like, what do they want? Like, ultimately, these 1%ers, because again, it is not what we want. One thought they live in a different reality.
Yeah, I'm so happy that y'all kind of have taken us to this part of the conversation, because I think that it's so, like, what you're saying, Kato, is like so right, which is that like, we have no idea what matters to these people, because they have gone beyond the everyday like struggle of being a person in this society, right? Like, Jeff Bezos literally like bought a like multi-million-dollar yacht for like, I don't even know for what reason, other than like a tax write-off, and because he enjoys being out in the water, like with a helicopter pad. Like, none of it actually, when you really like deep it, it doesn't make any sense. There's nothing rational about this behavior. And I just saw it, like, I mean, fuck Sam Harris, and coming out like, what is it, 5 years later with like some story about Elon Musk, like all of a sudden that forgives you for all your friendship with him for years. But he mentioned that they made $1 million bet. Obviously, like, Elon Musk didn't live up to it, but like made $1 million bet about COVID and like the impacts of COVID that Elon obviously was wrong about in terms of the number of people that would die from it. And like, that's the game that like, they really do think that this is the Matrix, and that they're completely not susceptible to the same stuff that the rest of us are. And that thing of like, they have a plan to get out of here. They're going to take as much from us as they can, and then they're going to go off and they're going to create their own utopia, or whatever they think a utopia looks like. And the reality is that like, what many people, many communities have been fighting for is the utopia. Imagine a world where someone can just cross a border, go into a different place, make a life for themselves, build a community that's culturally relevant, that creates something beautiful, and then like the most democratic thing ever, which is that they use their money to build up the businesses and the like types of cooperatives or the types of economy that makes sense for them. Look at Dearborn, Michigan. Like, as much as people want to hate on Michigan for the vote from this like last go around, that community has also figured out a way to immigrate from some of the most violent ridden like states crashing down to move all the way to the coldest part of the country, to then figure out how to make a halal community with grocery stores that serve the community, with community centers that really try to make sure that like no one is in the worst position. They already came from like a terrible situation. They came here and they created a community that works for each other. What is like, that's so utopian to me. But really and truly, we have a government and we have an elite structure that puts its finger on the scale every time that people have figured out a way to move closer to a utopia. And I think that is like fundamental to me as well, is that, you know, this politic that is about making people feel as unstable as possible so that they never build anything good for each other. That is so like not just undemocratic, that is like literally countering the good that we can create. Because if the finger gets lifted, we see what happens in communities. We see communities that like, you know, go through reparations commissions, or, you know, when they give everyone like a universal basic income just so they can afford the things that they need to afford. Everything just, the quality of life just shoots up. People are happier. People are more engaged. People show up to different meetings. Parent-teacher associations have like a higher turnout. It's like when people do not have to worry about the next minute, they can worry about the next 5 years. And that is the biggest detriment to me in terms of like this precarious kind of politicking. And it's just like elitist bullshit at this point. But I think y'all are totally right about, we have to go a little bit further into understanding like, we're talking about a different psyche. We have to like actually start thinking about these people the same way they think about us, which is that we aren't human enough to be worth a grain of salt. Actually, y'all have evolved into a place of like, you don't think about human related things. Like, you actually do not think about what the rest of society thinks about. And so we have to think about you as different, the same way they think of us as having different needs. And it's not to say like I would go out into the world and like propose that as like our path forward. But I do think it's like, it's a different way of thinking, because I think that we actually make ourselves feel crazy and we kind of lose our minds when we actually think of these people as like normal, everyday humans, because they're not.
You're hitting on something. And I think this is the thing. I talk with an OG all the time as leftists, like the contradictions. We just kind of struggle with it a little bit more. Cado had said something. I took some notes. Cado had said something earlier that really hit me. Like, we have a bad reputation of not being able to have conversations with people. We fall into that same tactic that the right wing does to poor white folks, right? Like, we as leftists can also be susceptible to that. And it's really difficult to do, but I think it's because we aren't suited for conflict resolution. I think we want to have everybody on board, and it just doesn't work that way. The right wing proves it. Like, they kind of work like an amoeba. Like, there are people who are progressively social on stuff. They're like, yeah, I'm pro weed legalization, fuck the police, but I voted Trump. Why? What was resonating with them? And I think it's part of that. It's like where people associate us with the arrogance of these upper middle class liberals. It's unfortunate. But to touch on that, I mean, kind of connected to where I was going, I think we're at an interesting time right now because Trump's policies are unintentionally opening people's eyes. Like, was it that guy, Sean Strickland? I think recently came out and he was like, yo, this isn't America first. Like, what the fuck? A bunch of other right-wing folks are like, yo, like, we don't we don't want you to do that to Palestine. We don't want you to turn it into a resort town. Like, I'm struggling, B. Like, give me money. But the thing is we're so focused on theory, so focused on just being so goddamn perfect, and we're not building anything. They build stuff. So right now, it's like, I think for us, in order to counteract that, we got to build it. Like, the opposition is building, is buying land and forcing farmers to have GMO crops. Well, all right. Well, we're going to buy rooftops. We're going to buy this playground. We're going to put a freaking farm in every corner, so that we compete against you. And I think it's the time now that we just need one understanding that, like, yeah, these guys are out to kill us. Like, it's very clear. The food we're eating is poison. The air is poison. The paint in the house is poison. They're trying to kill us. They don't live like us. They eat different beef. They drink different drinks. It's different. So yeah, that really resonates with us.
Yeah, can I just jump in with one thing real quick? So one of the other things too, just to say it out loud, is like one of the communities that have been affected by all these like federal layoffs has been veterans, because there's been a veteran priority for all federal jobs. So when you're trying to eliminate 1.3 million jobs and you're already 400,000 through, like, the fact that like we can't galvanize on that reality of like, actually it has all been a show. Patriots never. It's always been about the war economy, like veterans don't matter until it comes to the dog and pony show at the White House or whatever. So I think just to like say that additionally, and I'll come back to my other thought after, but Cotter, you should go first.
Yeah, I was going to say mine's also really quick, reacting to something that you said too, Marvin. And it was that they're like not eating the same beef. They're not eating the same salad, but they're trying to convince us that actually the reality is that you are not eating the same thing as your neighbor over there. Like, again, it's like this, they are diverting the attention from themselves and scapegoating communities for that, like, diversion, right? So it's like, no, actually, that immigrant is way more dangerous to you than I am to you. But actually, the real danger is the person that's saying that to you. They literally bet on your lives during the pandemic. Like, when you said that, Mikkel, I just like, God, the like anger that courses through you when you hear shit like that. Like, we know people, everybody knows at least someone in their community that died from COVID. And that guy literally bet $1 million on the numbers. Like, that's what we're talking about. They don't care about you. They don't care about us. What makes people think that? I really want to understand, like, what makes people think that a millionaire, billionaire, the richest people in the world, care about anything that you care about your life? And I like think so much about, I feel like we all draw on our own personal experiences because that's like what we can draw on, right? And I think about, there was this really interesting post from the New York Times opinion that interviewed people. It was called like something on tyranny, or like slipping into tyranny. And it interviewed people from different countries that slipped into authoritarianism. And it was essentially, it ended with the US to highlight, it starts with attacking the easiest group, right? So it starts with attacking the most vulnerable, which is wild when you think about the religious and right-wing aspect of it, because if you talk to any theologian, if you talk to anyone that truly follows, for example, I come from Catholicism, like the writings and teachings of Jesus, you are literally, Jesus was Palestinian. Like, he's on the other side that most of these people are on. And they're saying that they're doing this work in the name of whatever. But where I was going with that is, I feel like it's, actually, I got a little caught up in that Jesus thing. Sorry. I'm like, where was I going with that? But I do think that it's really interesting at the end of the day when you like sit and think about, like, really deeply. I've never asked anybody that question. Like, what does like a Trump have to offer to you? Because like, again, and then this really dives into the misinformation, because people will say grocery prices, the economy. We know all of that is obviously like a farce, but you really have to, the misinformation piece for me, I think, is like one of the like little threads. And then in general, like I'm sorry, I really got caught up on the religious thing, because it really does make me angry that people are like doing things in the name of Jesus Christ, when like you're literally like, immigrants are Jesus. Like, I grew up in Catholicism, and I was taught to see God in everybody else. God is everywhere. And like, you are literally like, you're taking away, like, this whole taking away things, like people can't have things, but I can, is like the complete opposite of what I know I was freaking taught. Like, it's just insane. Now I really wish I remember like where I was going with that. So I'm just gonna pause. I really get angry. I'm like, that's not what Jesus would do. Like Jesus would be mad at you. God damn it. Sorry. Now I'm really getting worked up.
I think Eric was going to go next. Maybe you might remember after he goes.
Sure. I mean, what I was going to say is I think went back to something Marvin brought up, which actually I never in my wildest dream would have thought Sean Strickland would be brought up in this podcast. That was incredible. He's an MMA.
Who Sean Strickland?
Yeah, he's this MMA
Don't know who
fighter.
that is.
Yeah, he was a middleweight champion at one point, but he got a lot of notoriety for saying wildly outlandish shit. A lot of it highly offensive. He's openly very right wing, pro Trump, pro like that side of American politics. What I was thinking of is I do think one of our podcast and many like it get criticism for us pointing out the problem. We spend a lot of time on the problem, which I think is necessary. You need to start with the problem before you get to a solution. I do think there's an opportunity right now with the precarity of actually flipping it around of a Trump administration and this right-wing populism that is trying to make us demonize each other. But there's glimpses of the hypocrisy that shows up, like the support for Israel's genocide in Gaza, in Palestine, where even the most right-wing people are like, wait a minute, this doesn't add up. This isn't what I want. And I think there's an opportunity for us to get to bringing those people along in a way that maybe there hasn't been in a while, because there are this oligarchy is much more clear and in your face than I think it's been under a democratic regime or even prior neocon regimes, where it's so in your face that I think there is an opportunity for us to kind of, not to say reach across the aisle, but to speak with people who have othering views than us currently, who I think could be closer to being able to switch and change the narrative of who is your enemy, and making that really clear so that it's not immigrants and trans people. It's actually the people that are making you poor are the people that are extremely rich. That's what was on my mind.
Yeah. I think just to pick up on the thread that Kato was sharing about like the God piece, is that like the reason that religion is like the spear for a lot of these attacks is because there's I'm not saying this to like as someone who has become increasingly religious over the past year. I'm saying this as like someone who also understands this as being susceptible, is that people with a deep faith system and like their life revolves around faith are also super susceptible to this type of messaging. And they're people that you can lie to their face. But if you say, believe me, trust me, this is what will end up happening, they're the most likely people to like galvanize around that pipe dream, right? And I think that that's like part of the reason that religion has been used, is because I think that the right wing has seen the weaknesses of people that have a deep faith but no real community connection beyond that. They isolate themselves. And I say that to pick up on what Marvin and Eric are also mentioning, which is that as a leftist community, because of how few of us we feel like there is, we have become isolated and siloed. And we have looked really freaking stupid because we want to speak at people and lecture at people with facts and figures as if that's going to move their hearts and their minds. And that is not what moved them previously. So why would it move them now? And I think this piece about like, we got to build farms. We got to build community centers. Wherever we can build, we should build. And it has to be to materially benefit people. And if anything, I've been shown about what politicians will do in a time of crisis, right now, I'm seeing the weakest display of political power on all sides. I'm seeing a Republican Party that is in power bend backwards to accommodate for this nutso like kind of political arena, right? Like we just saw Lindsey Graham go from 2 weeks ago supporting the Ukrainian president to like bashing him like literally a day ago and telling him that he needs to like, send someone else in to negotiate because he's bad for business. Like And I'm thinking also about like I also still want to hold feet to the fire for the Dems. The Dems did nothing through their 4 years, knowing that Biden was supposed to be a one-term president, to materially impact and change the lives of people. I am someone with student loans who did not get any student loan relief. That was your top billing, right? And I'm not saying it because I wish that, like I'm fine. I'm doing okay. But I can't imagine the people that have been so long on unemployment that they have opted out of the job market. Going on 2 years, 3 years, right? People have been lied to using facts and figures, and everyone uses propaganda, right? Propaganda is a common tool for everyone. Whether it's good propaganda or bad propaganda is, usually history tells you how that goes. But Democrats were using their own form of propaganda, and they were lying to people about just how good it was while their material circumstances were not changing. And we saw how the right wing picked up on that and swept a lot of people right. So why is it that right now leftists aren't doing the same with right-wing people that were told something and were propagandized and lied to, and their material circumstances are actually getting worse, and they aren't getting swept up? And it's maybe a little bit of ignorance from that crowd, but I think it also has to be like, we have to question, like, why are we so ineffective at speaking to people that are being harmed by the system that they just voted for? Why are we so bad at this? Like, I really think that that's a fundamental question. And it has to be coming from a place of seeing people for what they're experiencing and speaking to that. I am never going to get a survey or a chart and walk around with it and go into like rural, poor, red communities and be like, hey, look at this chart. This tells you just like how bad it is under Republican administrations. Now vote differently. No one's going to listen to me. They're going to be like, get the fuck out of here, you dweeb, And also, I will say my last thing is that we have one of the most dweebish people being the face of a movement, and we can't eviscerate him into like, they got away with Sleepy Joe. And I have Elon Musk hoisting a chainsaw and being like, a kid that would have gotten, like, he literally got bullied, and that's why he acts the way he does. Right? And yet he is not going away. Somehow people are like backing him as some like I don't even know. Like the image of him is like so high right now for a bunch of idiots, but it's actually not that good for everyone else. So I think we can eviscerate him and put him away from like the public eye for once and for all,
Yeah, I mean, well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's so difficult, right? Because I'm looking at what's happening in West Africa and the Sahel, right? The Organization of Sahel States. I mean, these dudes, those countries are kicking ass. The population is primed for this. They're organizing. They're hyper independent. Burkina Faso recently introduced a solar car. And actually, if you look at the past few weeks, Elon stocks, it's just been tanking. They're like, oh, well, it's probably the bad press. Not really. The Chinese EV market they're far better, far more effective. And then now you got Africa coming in with the solar car. They're creating in a way, they're not even being directly confrontational. They're still willing to make deals, but you're going to bear gold, for example, in Mali recently. You're going to pay taxes. Try to scuff them off. Nah. You want to stay? You're going to pay your taxes. You're going to do it right. We're not opposed to. And I think that's just, I think that's really what it is. I think part of it is like, they've destroyed our ability to dream of a new world, because we're constantly in survival mode, right? Like no matter what solution we think of, we're always going to think of, oh my God, well, how are we going to sustain it without money? I think the other thing I think about too, I don't know if this is true or not, but like I think about why it might be easier to start these movements in other places, like tropical places, because you could go to Colombia, go to the mountains and set up a little farm. You'll be all right. If I can't get a job, the farmers got me, We don't have that here. This is like a barren wasteland. We did, but you can't just go out and pick a pawpaw tree. Pawpaw fruit and eat that. You can't just go out and hunt a turkey or something like that. Like they've. What I'm trying to get at is like we need to really like get so deep inside, because they've even changed the terrain affects how we think. They've changed the terrain. They've changed our abilities to dream, our ability to think freely, because you can't even think certain thoughts without being like, oh my God, like they might be listening. So it's like, how do you even uproot that? And I think we got to take an example from our folks, like in the global South and our indigenous friends. You really just got to take the first step and unplug. Just be like, no, I can do it on my own. I don't need to buy that new car. I can build that engine myself. The specs online. It's going to suck, but I'll do it myself. No, I don't need to build my house with concrete because you own the concrete company. No, I got bamboo. It's cold hardy. I'll build it my goddamn self. It's got to be like that. And then, like, lastly, I'll leave it with this. The thought I keep having is like the most radical stuff we keep thinking about is the most basic human crap. Like, like having your own water and access to your own water treatment center, having access to your own food, having access to your own like housing. That's like basic human stuff. Birds have that. You know what I mean? Birds in nature have that. But we're so
Yeah. Oh my God. So many thoughts. I also remembered my thought from the last thread. I'll just say like super quick. Tyranny. I was talking about tyranny in that video on that the New York Times posted. Talk to if you know anybody from a region of the world that has experienced some sort of civil war, conflict. I say that coming from Colombia, who went through a 6-year civil war, signed peace treaties in 2016. We're actually in danger of slipping back. I think the conquer and divide is a very global thing happening right now. Like there's actually, a lot of people are taking back arms here. The situation is actually backside. When you said you can get a little farm somewhere, I'm like, oh my God, Marvin, I hope that continues to be true, because actually things are looking a little rough right now to that end. And I think it's a global trend. I also think that talk to your friends that have come from these places. It starts with the attacks on jobs, like in the federal government, like they're doing right now. It starts by saying that journalists are the enemy. It starts by saying starts with the simplest, it starts with what's happening right now, essentially in the US. The thread that I feel like I really want to pick up on, Marvin, and it kind of is related to this, is how different leftist movements are in the global South compared to the US. Everything I've heard from any of my friends here in Colombia, I have a lot of friends out in Irvine that are international students. So a lot of them are from South Asia, from India, Nepal. So like a lot of these countries, like India, obviously with Modi, we're talking like extreme repression as well, right? And I really wondered why leftist movements in the global South are so much more successful at reminding people of their collective power than we are in the US. Something about the US leftist movement is missing some sort of element. I have never really been able to understand what is the difference. But one of the things that it does come to mind is I feel like having grown up in Colombia, having grown up with Colombian family, there's a lot more an ingrained sense of collectivity and collective power in our shared knowledge that we share with our kids. With like indigenous, for example, knowledge has always been very, very, very about the collective, very much about, it's not about the individual, it's about stewarding this place that you have the privilege to exist in this very moment. And I really do think that there is there has to be some sort of cultural shift element. I really encourage people to look for organizations or to look for groups that are talking about this and that are, I think it's really, really easy. I have a lot of people in my life that are just so angry that it feels really hard. It feels really hard. People I think are so mad that even if you say, I have a friend that voted for Trump, they're like, how the fuck can you be friends with a Trump supporter? I am that person sometimes. I was that person. I'm angry. Dude, my parents are never gonna come and get to see that, my life in the US, because they can't come. My mom can, but it's just I'm angry, but I kind of really, really feel bad for people that have that much hate. It must be exhausting to not be able to see another human being without the lens of hatred. So I think, Eric, you made a really good point about we need to also focus on, we really are at a right time. It really is. A lot of organizations, we have, I think, a responsibility, especially those of us that are on the left side, to provide more spaces for people to be in community and to talk with people that are different from them, because we all live in such bubbles.
Eric and Marvin, just want to say, I think we're going to wrap up in a moment, but do y'all want to share any final thoughts before I do that?
Just getting back to where we started about precarity, it's amazing to see how this is always been the case, but how the elite can basically blackmail us into serving their needs. Like, it's really hard not to buy into the system of capitalism, using Amazon, using like all these conveniences and services, because it's just like, these are the options that are handed to you. And I know it's a stretch, but speaking of just recent events with Zelensky and Trump and having their little, whatever we want to call that, kerfuffle in the Oval Office, I think this is a really great example of clarity of how the U.S. government, when you're back against the wall in a corner, is exactly where you should be. Is exactly where they want you, because that's where we're like, either give us all your national resources and accept half your country's going to be gone, or just get stampeded. That's when you're backed into a corner. The same can be said about, honestly, all of us. And especially if you think about the work that the people that your uncle works with, Kato, they're in the most precarious situation. They are the most easy to be exploited, because when you're in that sense of precariousness in your life, that's how like you lose your power. And that's all you can do is focus on surviving. So if we can get past like just baseline survival, that's step one. And then step two is like community survival, as opposed to just how do I get food today?
Yeah. Like that for me, that's where it's at. And then there's this overarching conspiracy of the fact that, what I believe, if I'm a coach, right? If I am the coach of the leftist team, I'm telling you the opposition wants to depopulate the world. Now, you may laugh. You may say, oh, these guys have said this openly. They believe that Mother Earth doesn't have enough for all these mouths, all these people. Bill Gates is on record saying, well, the world, there's more children in the global south when children in these westernized countries consume way more. You and I, the four of us here, consume way more resources than 4 children in the global south combined. The earth has more than enough to give, but they don't want to share, and ultimately that's the goal. And for me, where we're at right now in this new age with Elon Musk is manifesting the ideologies of like eugenics, but through technology. Right? Like we're seeing it. This was talking about Neuralink. You got all these freaking MAGA folks being like, but you also got this digitizing currency, which they're going to have control over, restricting your movements. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing all these plane crashes, deregulating these agencies, intentionally doing that so that our movements can be restricted. Elon Musk pumps out so much technology. It's hard to keep up. Nobody has time to be like, hey, are you doing this ethically? That satellite that crashed over the Caribbean, Mikkel, I don't know if you saw that a couple of weeks ago, right over the Caribbean, dropping debris over some of the poorest people ever. Nobody knows what's in it. Nobody knows. Tracking our movements. They're slowly tightening the controls every time, and they do it with fear. Every time we get scared, we give up a little bit more control, Every time something happens and they scare a lot of these poor white folks, they give up a little bit more of their rights because, hey, we got to get these immigrants out. Where we're empowering a military force through ICE to do just about anything with impunity. Outside of your local police force, all these things to me are very connected. And so for me, understanding the game plan is like, yo, that's the plan. Like, no BS. How are we counteracting that? How are we counteracting that? And I think we start small. I think we just start where we're at, start with each other, start with your family, start with your friends. That's all we can do.
Mic drop. I almost want to not say my final thoughts are so quick. And I feel like, Mikkel, we can come full circle. I feel like I want to hear kind of like your closing, what your thoughts are. But I just want to say they want to shock us. They want to paralyze us. The news cycle right now is meant to keep you in fear. It's meant to keep you paralyzed. It's really hard to figure out the right balance of being well informed and not letting that shit really get to your mental health. So they don't crash out with each other. That's like what we're doing kind of a little bit. I got off of Instagram for a little while and TikTok and social media. And honestly, it was really nice to hear my own thoughts and opinions rather than being oversaturated with everybody else's. So I recommend that as if anybody is feeling particularly anxious, particularly really affected by all of the stuff that's being thrown at us, give yourself a moment. We have, privilege feels really weird. We have the privilege to take a moment. And if you have that privilege, I think that you need to take it, because we're not gonna be ready when that like real fight comes, because the fight has been here, but it's just the beginning of a really long 4 years. I hope 4 years, because like that's where we're at. We're at a place where we don't know if this is going to go beyond 4 years or not, given the way that things are going. And I think I just want to say that I like truly appreciated everybody's thoughts throughout this entire conversation. I think that there's so many threads we could have gone on, but really at the end of the day, the way that you said it, Marvin, I think was just like so gold. We like have to turn to each other, and that's the place where we initiate, where we start. And again, let's remember, as leftists, just our particular place, our particular role, and then how we as folks that are very aware of the trajectory that we're on, how do we, not in an over alarming way, but in an alarming way, let people know that it's not going to get better for everybody. It's actually just going to get exponentially worse. You might not be the person that they're targeting right now. You will be. That is how it happens every single time. So just remember that.
Thanks, y'all. Yeah, I feel like y'all brought in every aspect of where I wanted this conversation to go. I think for me, there's two things that are happening right now, right? And when I think about this idea of the politics of precarity and how the elite are making us as precarious as possible, on one lane, they're identifying different identities that have always been societally at the margins, right? And they're focusing on those folks, and they're attacking them over and over again so that they can't look up and see the world as they want it to be. They have to see the world as it is for them. And then on the other side, what Eric was alluding to is that by introducing all of these convenience tech over the past 20 that have somehow normalized that technology needs to be a fundamental part about how we interact with the world or don't interact with the world, it's making those of us that shouldn't be in precarious positions feel precarious, raise our anxiety, make us feel like we're not enough, make us feel like, oh my gosh, if I don't get that Amazon delivery of my groceries, I won't have enough time in this week, and blah, blah, blah. And you never look up and say, well, why do I need to not just walk down the street to the grocery store? Why can't I just go into the community meeting and just sit down for 2 hours? Why is it that I work so much and I don't actually spend enough time in my apartment that I pay so much money for, right? So those two angles are people that are often precarious already are being more precarious in their societal status. And then those of us that should have the privilege and have the tension and be out there fighting for our fellow people don't have the time for some reason, and we can't put our finger on why. All of that to say, the solutions are clear. Bring it back local. Make things matter to people materially. Have conversations. Get away from your phone, your computer, your video games. Reintroduce analog lifestyle into your life. That is how we become better humans, because that is how we have become human. It has never been this stuff. And I'll leave everyone with this final poem, one that I've just been reflecting on a lot, given the situation in Gaza, given that it's being perpetrated by people that were the victims of the Holocaust. It's kind of like it's a weird poem because it's actually an amalgamation of a bunch of speeches from Pastor Martin Niemöller. And there's no exact like writing out of how he said this, but it's folks' best summation, which is that first they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. And with that, I hope y'all find community. I hope you get back into speaking with one another rather than speaking at one another. And let's get to a place where we're mutually benefiting and supporting one another in deep community. And that's all. Thanks, y'all.